big fall in the number of sales, a huge fall from 22 to 23, almost 30% decrease in the number of sales from 22 to 23, very, very low historically speaking, comparing it 2 years prior to COVID. We have the lowest number of sales ever. Inventory is not going to recover overnight. It's going to take years, or it may never ever get back to where it was. All right, 2024 is in the books, and what we're going to do is run through all the data from across the entire state and give you an update on what the market report looks like for all of 2024. We'll compare that to some previous years, and then look at how's that going to affect 2025. And so as we get into it, we'll jump right into the data here. And I know these are a lot of numbers, so I'm going to walk through them and talk you through them. But what we did here is look at the number of sales that happened in 2024 and then compared them to 2023 and 2022, so you can get an idea of the change in the number of sales, and then also number of active listings in December of 2024, so you can get an idea of what the market is doing in terms of inventory. And we broke this down by island, and so we'll go through this kind of island by island, right? So starting off with Oahu, most of the activity in the state happens on Oahu. As you can see here, there was 10,000 sales in 22, there was 7,623, so that was a decrease of 25%, right? So big fall in the number of sales, and this is when interest rates started to rise and we really saw the market slow down in 2023. And then if we look at 2024 on Oahu, there was actually a small recovery, right? There was 0.6% more sales in 24 than there was in 23, but pretty much exactly the same, right? So a huge fall from 22 to 23, and then just pretty much even from 23 to 24. On the Big Island, the island of Hawaii, we had 6,117 sales in 22. There was 4,500 sales in 23, and then 4,400 sales in 24. So there was a 25% decrease from 22 to 23, but there's just a 2.2% decrease in 24 compared to 23. So a little bit less sales, but pretty much the same, just like Oahu was. Looking at Maui, there was 2,500 sales in 22, almost 1,700 sales in 23, and then only 1,605 in 24. And so 33% decrease from 22 to 23, and then a 5.4% decrease from 23 to 24. So the most significant decrease in the number of sales definitely happened on the island of Maui. And then on the island of Kauai, we had about almost 1,100 sales in 22, 707 in 23, and then a bump up to 774. So that was almost a 10% increase in the number of sales on the island of Kauai. But if we average this out for the entire state, we see that we had this almost 30% decrease in the number of sales from 22 to 23, but a slight increase of 0.5%. So almost exactly the same number of sales that happened in 23 happened in 24. And so it's pretty much a very similar year if you compare those 2 years in terms of market activity on the sales side. On the listing side, as we shift down to that, the difference here on the listing side is that we continually see increases in the number of listings, right? So in Oahu, we went from 2,000 active listings in 23 to 2,700 active listings in 24. That was a change of 32%, almost 33%. On the Big Island, we saw it go from 1,947 to 2,212. That was an increase of 13% number of properties on the market. Maui, crazy, right? We went from 523 listings to 953. That's an increase of 82%. So the market there, very huge increase in inventory on the island of Maui. And on the island of Kauai, we had 354, and we went up to 447. So an increase of 26%. Statewide, we were looking at a 38% increase in the number of available properties comparing 23 to 24. So number of sales almost completely flat. Number of listings that are on the market increased dramatically, almost 40% statewide. And then looking at this, I wanted to put this into context of what does 2024 look like versus a normal year in the past, right? Because we had all this volatility in the past 4 years with COVID, and then the huge increase in interest rates and the drop in activity. And so 2015 was a very stable, normal market across the state. And so I took those 2015 numbers and almost 9 years ago, 10 years ago, and compared them to 2024, so you can get an idea of how does 2024 compare to a really standard normal year in the market. And running through these numbers, the first set of numbers are sales, right? So 15% less sales happened on Oahu if you compare 15 to 24. Big Island was up almost 4.5%. Maui was down 29%, and Kauai was down 22%. So historically speaking, if we look at a very normal year, and this is very typical, 16,000, 17,000 sales in the state is a very typical number pre-COVID. Looking at 2024, we had 14,531 sales total across the state. That's a decrease in 15%, almost 16%. So it definitely was a very, very slow year. I don't know if it can get any slower in terms of the number of sales in 2024. We can probably only go up from here in 2025, but it's a good comparison to kind of have a benchmark in the past and see how that compares to the current market. And then looking at listings, same thing. This is a huge driver of what we're going to talk about next, which is price, because everybody's always interested in what the prices are and what the effects have been. If you look at the number of active listings across the state, right, there was a 2% increase for Oahu. So almost the same, little bit higher. But if you look at all the other islands, if you look at the number of listings available in 2015 versus the number of listings available in 2024, it's a 48% decrease for the Big Island, a 36% decrease for Maui, and a 52% decrease for Kauai. And so the neighbor islands have an extreme issue with inventory. We have way less properties on the market than we did pre-COVID in normal times. And so that's an overall decrease statewide of 33%. So we are still, from a inventory standpoint, very, very low, historically speaking, comparing it to years prior to COVID. And this is why when you look at sales decreasing and the number of sales being historically low, this is why when we get to this next set of data here, the median price change on all the islands, this is median price in 23 versus median price in 24. It doesn't necessarily make sense, right? If you think, well, if we have the lowest number of sales ever, wouldn't prices kind of come down or be flat? And that definitely wasn't the case because inventory is so low and the demand is still in the market, but with the low level of inventory, it continues to drive prices up. So across the board, if you look at Oahu, and these are just condo and single family homes, I excluded land from this set of data because land can skew the data down and it's not indicative of what most folks are going to be buying, which are single family homes or condos. And so Oahu, you went from 697 median price to 730, an increase of 4.73%. So almost 5% increase in median price. On the Big Island, went from 544 to 579. It's an increase of 6.4%. On Maui, it went from 965,000 to 1.15 million. So an increase of 20% on Maui, where you had extremely low number of sales and a big increase in inventory. Prices still went up almost 20%. And on Kauai, it went from 975 to just about 1.1 million, an increase of 12%. So across the state, if you average this out, we saw a 10.7% increase in the median price if you compare 2024 to 2023. So prices are not falling. That's mainly due to the issues with inventory still being very, very low. And the forecast looking towards 2025 is that inventory is not going to recover overnight. It's going to take years, or it may never ever get back to where it was, but the demand is definitely going to increase. We are at the lowest level of number of sales that we've seen really in history. And so there's going to be more sales in 2025, almost guaranteed, unless some catastrophic economic disaster happens, which is definitely not in the forecast at all. So with the low inventory and the increased demand, we are going to continue to see prices rise. And so the takeaway here is, the piece of advice here is you do not want to wait. If you're waiting for interest rates to fall or you're waiting for prices to come down, it's just not going to happen. And you're going to pay more, potentially 10% more for the same home next year as you would have this year if things continue to go the way that they're going, which nothing really says that it won't. So keep that in mind. And so if you have any questions about your specific market, your specific neighborhood, we can definitely dig into that data. This is island-wide, statewide data. But if you have any questions, you can always reach out, Dylan@buybigisland.com, or you can book a meeting in the comments below. There's always a link to my calendar where you can book a meeting and we'll have a conversation. Just let me know what you want to talk about. I always appreciate you guys watching. And this is your 2024 market report for the state of Hawaii. And I'll see you guys next week. Aloha.